In the 1890s, one woman decided who mattered in New York City. Caroline Schermerhorn Astor kept a list of exactly 400 names, the only people worthy of her Fifth Avenue ballroom. Her nephew William resented every bit of it, so in 1893, he tore down his own mansion next door and built a hotel in its place to drown her home in noise and shadow. She hit back. Her son erected a 17-story tower right beside it. The contract connecting both buildings included a clause allowing either side to brick up the corridor between them at will. That corridor became Peacock Alley, and those two spite-built hotels became the Waldorf-Astoria, a monument to pettiness that somehow housed presidents, spies, and billionaires for the next century. On Fifth Avenue in the late 1800s, the Astor mansions stood shoulder to shoulder, their facades separated by little more than a carriage's width, but worlds apart in ambition and anxiety. Caroline Schermerhorn Astor presided over her domain with the precision of a general and the selectiveness of a customs official. Her famous 400 list, published in the society columns and whispered about in drawing rooms, was less an invitation than a verdict. If your name appeared, you existed. If not, you might as well live in Brooklyn. Inside her marble halls, Mrs. Astor orchestrated society's calendar, deciding which families would survive the season and which would fade into irrelevance. The proximity of her nephew William's mansion was both a convenience and a constant irritation. The two houses, mapped side by side in the 1894 Sanborn Fire Insurance Atlas, formed a kind of social, demilitarized zone. At street level, footmen eyed each other with suspicion. Delivery boys risked their jobs if they rang the wrong bell. Even the paving stones seemed to know which Astor they served. For Caroline, the real threat was not just William's presence, but the possibility that her carefully curated hierarchy could be breached. The 400 was never just about numbers. It was about the invisible velvet rope that kept the city's upstarts at bay. Her diary, dated February 4th, 1890, records her unease. The very thought of a hotel where our genteel society once gathered causes me great disquiet. Society reporters treated the block as a spectator sport. Columns in the New York Times described the daily spectacle: opera cloaks trailing up marble steps, carriages idling 3 rows deep, and the occasional scandal sparked by an uninvited guest. Inside, the ballroom's capacity was a weapon. A seat at Ms. Astor's table was not just a privilege, it was proof of existence. The threat of losing that seat, or worse, having your view blocked by a hotel's brick wall, was unthinkable. The demolition that would soon follow was not just an act of construction, it was an act of war. For Caroline, the loss of her neighbor's mansion was less about bricks and mortar and more about the possibility that her fortress of exclusivity could be breached by commerce, noise, and worst of all, the wrong sort of people. In this compressed space, every gesture, every party list, every snub became ammunition. The stakes were as high as the ceilings, and the consequences would echo far beyond Fifth Avenue. On a raw winter morning in January 1893, William Waldorf-Astor filed demolition permit B-1992041 with the city, authorizing the razing of his own Fifth Avenue mansion. The ink was barely dry before wrecking crews arrived, their hammers echoing down the block like a declaration of war. Neighbors gathered to watch as stone lions and mahogany doors were carted away, the symbols of Astor grandeur reduced to rubble and dust. The New York Times, never one to miss a spectacle, ran headlines chronicling the daily progress. One day a marble staircase gone, the next, Mrs. Astor's former view replaced by scaffolding and piles of brick. William was not content to simply move out. He wanted to erase any trace of domestic civility and replace it with something that would haunt his aunt's social calendar for years to come. The Waldorf Hotel Company was chartered that April. funded with millions in Astor Trust capital and a not-so-subtle endorsement from the city's new money elite. The plans called for a 13-story fortress of hospitality, complete with electric lights, private bathrooms, and a lobby designed to swallow up the 400 and spit them back out as paying guests. Construction moved with the urgency of a man settling a score. By October 1893, the Waldorf Hotel opened its doors, the gas lamps of old New York flickering in the shadow of a building that seemed to exist purely to offend. The opening night was a parade of contradiction. Society matrons in borrowed diamonds, railroad barons sniffing at the floral arrangements, and a steady line of carriages blocking Ms. Astor's front walk. William himself had already decamped for England, but his message was impossible to miss. If he could not have the last word in the drawing room, he would have it in stone and steel. What began as a personal affront now towered over Fifth Avenue, its illuminated sign glowing through the night. The Waldorf's first guests checked in under the wary gaze of society reporters and the outright scorn of Mrs. Astor's inner circle. The transformation from private mansion to public hotel was complete. The lights of the Waldorf flickered on, and with them, a new era of hospitality and social combat began. John Jacob Astor IV entered the contest with a blueprint and a grudge. In 1897, construction crews arrived to raise the Astoria Hotel, not just next to the Waldorf, but above it, 4 stories higher, a 17-story monument to the principle that, in New York, altitude equals authority. The new tower cast a literal shadow over William's creation. But the real drama played out at ground level, where lawyers and surveyors marked out a strip of marble, destined for infamy. The two hotels, now joined at the hip by rivalry and geography, needed a way to coexist without ever truly cooperating. The solution came in the form of a 300-foot corridor, lined with marble and gilt, stretching from one lobby to the other. Society dubbed it Peacock Alley, a place for evening promenades and strategic glances, but the legal minds behind it saw something less romantic, a potential battleground with rules written in stone. On July 7, 1893, representatives from Andrew Mason and Company and from Samuel Gordon and Partners assembled in a private parlor, contract file H001989 open on the table. The trust minutes record hours of debate over corridor access, cleaning schedules, and the precise width of the marble baseboards. But the true masterstroke was buried deep in the agreement, the brick clause. Either party, with 5 days written notice, could wall off Peacock Alley with a temporary barrier up to 12 inches thick. No damages, no questions, just a polite letter and a pile of bricks between cousins. It was the legal equivalent of flipping the chessboard when the game got too tense. This clause was more than a safety valve. It was a codified threat, a reminder that every social handshake could be revoked at will. For John Jacob, the contract was both shield and sword. The architects even left a discreet seam in the marble, just in case. By the time the ink dried, the Astoria's height and the corridor's terms had turned a family spat into a permanent fixture of the city's legal landscape. The next time someone strolled Peacock Alley, they did so knowing that the path could vanish overnight. A 12-inch wall away from becoming just another locked door in the Astor family's house of mirrors. Electricity arrived at the Waldorf before most New Yorkers had stopped fearing it. In 1893, while brownstones across Manhattan still flickered with gaslight and the occasional candle, the Waldorf's engineers wired 1,200 incandescent bulbs to a dedicated Manhattan Electric Company feed. The schematics, still archived at Columbia's Avery Library, read like blueprints for a modern city. A 250 kilovolt line running beneath the marble floors, switchboards tucked behind mahogany panels, and a tangle of copper that powered not just the grand ballroom, but every guest room, kitchen, and corridor. The Astoria, completed 4 years later, extended the grid across both towers, making the combined hotel the brightest block in Midtown. Whether Ms. Astor liked it or not, the real marvel, though, was out of sight. 90% of rooms boasted private ensuite bathrooms, a figure that even today would impress a real estate agent. The plumbing contracts, signed with J.B. Kelly and Company in 1894, called for individual cast-iron water lines and waste stacks for each suite, a logistical feat that required more vertical piping than most municipal buildings. Hotel ledgers from 1895 document a private washroom charge for nearly every occupied room, and the maintenance logs show a small army of engineers on call to keep the water hot and the drains clear. In a city where the phrase shared facilities still haunted many tenements, the Waldorf's promise of a private bath was as much a status symbol as a silk opera cloak. Service, too, was engineered for spectacle. The Waldorf's 24-hour room service, tracked in ledgers labeled night catering, guaranteed that a guest could summon a meal at any hour, with a 30-minute delivery window that would shame many modern kitchens. Orders for oysters and champagne at 3 a.m. were not just accommodated, they were expected. The velvet rope system at the main entrance, described in the original hotel manual, was more than crowd control. It was theater. Gold-trimmed ropes and brass pulleys directed the flow of arrivals and departures, ensuring that the right people were seen at the right time and that the wrong people were gently but firmly redirected to the sidewalk. Behind the scenes, Oskar Tschirky, better known as Oscar of the Waldorf, oversaw the choreography. A Swiss immigrant who started as a waiter in 1894, Oskar rose to maitre d'hotel by the turn of the century, his personnel file dotted with commendations for promptness, courtesy, and discretion. He established protocols that became industry standards: a bell call system for summoning staff, a service ledger for tracking requests, and a kitchen timing chart that aimed for a 30-minute plate-to-suite journey, regardless of the hour or the guest's temperament. All of these systems, electrical, plumbing, and service, were designed not just to impress, but to overwhelm. The Waldorf-Astoria set new expectations for what a hotel could be, and in doing so, rewrote the rules of urban luxury. The irony was hard to miss. A family feud, fueled by snubs and social anxiety, had produced a machine of comfort and convenience that would define hospitality for the next century. The engineers and staff, working in the shadows of Astor ambition, delivered something the family never intended: a blueprint for modern living, born from rivalry and perfected in marble, brass, and electric light. The Waldorf-Astoria's guest register reads like a roll call for the ambitions and anxieties of the Gilded Age and beyond. Within months of opening, the hotel's ledgers began to fill with signatures that would shape not just society pages, but the course of American culture and power. Presidents arrived with their entourages and security details, each one adding another layer to the hotel's legend as New York's unofficial White House. Grover Cleveland's name appears in the registry in 1900, followed by Theodore Roosevelt, who preferred to hold court in the Palm Room rather than the Oval Office. By the time Franklin Roosevelt checked in for a 1939 campaign event, the staff had grown accustomed to Secret Service agents lurking behind potted palms. Inventors and financiers found the Waldorf-Astoria just as useful as politicians did. In 1897, Nikola Tesla took up residence in an executive suite, his diary noting the marvelous electric illumination and the hotel's willingness to tolerate his late-night experiments up to a point. The engineering staff, less enchanted, recorded a spike in power usage and a number of unexplained outages. Tesla's negotiations with J.P. Morgan for wireless funding unfolded in these rooms, their correspondence referencing the hotel's privacy and the discretion of its staff. Morgan himself maintained a permanent suite, using it as a kind of private annex to Wall Street. His business letters from 1899 mention the Waldorf's soundproofed doors and the convenience of summoning partners for midnight strategy sessions over oysters and whiskey. Writers and artists also gravitated to the hotel's grand lobbies and private dining rooms. Mark Twain made the Waldorf his base during the 1906 fundraising gala for the Tuskegee Institute. In his journal, he described the rooms as comfortable as a riverboat cabin, yet the service is of a citywide standard. Twain's fondness for the hotel's midnight suppers and Oscar Tschirky's famous Waldorf salad became the stuff of society gossip columns. The maitre d' managed to keep Twain's cigar smoke and opinions from overwhelming the more delicate guests. The parade of notables continued well into the 20th century. Every president from Cleveland to Eisenhower signed the guest book, sometimes for official functions, sometimes for private escapes. The hotel's presidential suite became a stage for both policy and pageantry, hosting everything from treaty negotiations to birthday parties. The guest books, now preserved in the National Archives, record a steady stream of dignitaries, tycoons, and celebrities, each one reinforcing the hotel's reputation as the axis around which New York's elite world revolved. The Waldorf-Astoria's allure was never just about luxury or convenience. It was about being seen, about proximity to power, about sharing the same corridors and cocktail hours as the men and women who shaped the headlines. The velvet ropes and marble halls promised privacy, but the real draw was the chance to belong, even briefly, to the story unfolding behind those doors. In the end, it was the very rivalry that built the hotel that made it irresistible, a monument to the idea that in New York, status is always under construction, and the right address can make all the difference. In the spring of 1929, the original Waldorf-Astoria stood at the crossroads of nostalgia and progress, its marble corridors echoing with the footsteps of presidents, tycoons, and the ghosts of its founding feud. But Fifth Avenue had moved on. The city's appetite for vertical ambition was insatiable, and the hotel's board, pressed by declining profits and rising land values, voted to sell the storied parcel. The buyers formed a developer consortium led by Al Hewitt, a name better known in real estate than in the society pages. Their intentions were not subtle: clear the block, erase the last trace of Astor rivalry, and make way for something that would outshine even the grandest family quarrel. Demolition began in earnest that May. Contractor logs from the Hewitt Group detailed the systematic dismantling, chandeliers wrapped in burlap, mahogany panels pried from the walls, and the famous Peacock Alley reduced to a pile of marble dust. Photographs from the New York Historical Society capture the spectacle: ironworkers perched on skeletal beams, the hotel's ornate crest dangling from a crane, crowds pressed against police barricades for a final glimpse of vanished grandeur. The Sanborn Fire insurance maps, once crowded with the outlines of ballrooms and private suites, were revised to a blank rectangle labeled vacant, awaiting new construction. By November 1929, the last stone had fallen. The demolition, completed just weeks before the stock market crash, left an empty scar in the city's heart and signaled the definitive end of the Astor family's architectural footprint on Fifth Avenue. The social chessboard that had inspired so many innovations was swept clean. What remained was a question. If a feud could build a hotel, what would replace it now that the feud and the families had moved on? The answer, as the developer consortium prepared their blueprints, would be a skyscraper for a new era. But before that rebirth, the Waldorf-Astoria name needed a new home, and the brand's next chapter would be written far from the dust and debris of its original battleground. On October 1st, 1931, the Waldorf-Astoria re-emerged on Park Avenue, its 47 limestone-clad stories rising above the city, crowned with Art Deco spires. The new hotel was more than a replacement. It was a statement of intent. In the midst of the Great Depression, the opening was a spectacle. Orchestras played, ceilings gleamed, and the guest list spanned Wall Street financiers and Broadway's latest talents. The New York Times called it a festival of optimism, and that optimism was built into every detail. Central to this transformation were the Waldorf Towers, 150 suites designed not as transient hotel rooms, but as permanent apartments. Lease records from 1931 reveal agreements stretching up to 30 years, with rents that rivaled the city's grandest addresses. Residents enjoyed a blend of privacy and service, midnight room service, a maid at the press of a button, and mail delivered to a Park Avenue address. The towers became a vertical enclave for the influential. Cole Porter composed in Suite 33A. General Douglas MacArthur returned from Tokyo to familiar comforts, and the Duke and Duchess of Windsor maintained their rituals of visibility and discretion. The tower's design catered to this exclusive world. Private entrances, dedicated elevators, and a separate concierge staff shielded residents from the city below. Lease clauses covered everything from daily orchids to ballroom reservations. Here, the distinction between guest and resident faded. Luxury meant being known, not just indulged. The hotel's new Park Avenue location placed it at the heart of Midtown's emerging business and diplomatic district, positioning the Waldorf-Astoria as a hub for power and permanence. The guest register read like a roll call of ambition, but the essence was in the details. The staff member who remembered your breakfast order, the private line to the maitre d'. The towers offered not just marble and gold, but the comfort of being recognized and remembered. The Waldorf-Astoria's reputation for luxury provided the perfect camouflage for a different kind of guest list during the Cold War. Between 1947 and 1962, the hotel's corridors became a favorite haunt for diplomats, spies, and the men who watched them. FBI surveillance files, now unsealed, read like a noir detective novel. Agents were assigned to monitor the comings and goings of United Nations delegations, Soviet attaches, and the occasional American official with too much access and not enough discretion. The Bureau's hotel watch operation gave the Waldorf-Astoria a supporting role in the theater of global espionage, where silverware might hide a listening device and a room service order could trigger a red flag in a government office across town. The hotel's proximity to the United Nations made it a natural safe house for foreign delegations seeking both comfort and plausible deniability. United Nations Security Memoranda from 1954 list the Waldorf-Astoria as a designated site for discreet accommodation and secure communications. The engineering staff, accustomed to installing gold-plated fixtures for royalty, were quietly contracted to run encrypted wiring behind the walls of select suites. The wiring diagrams, preserved in the hotel's archives, show a network of concealed lines, ostensibly for telephones, but capable of carrying encrypted signals for diplomatic use. Maintenance logs from the era include cryptic references to special service requests and guest-installed devices, a polite euphemism for the hidden microphones and transmitters favored by intelligence agencies on both sides of the Iron Curtain. FBI agents rotated through the lobby under the guise of tourists, their field reports noting the habits of Soviet delegates and the frequency of late-night meetings in the Waldorf Towers. The files mention room service orders that coincided with covert rendezvous and transcripts of intercepted calls, some mundane, some hinting at back-channel negotiations. The hotel's discretion became both a selling point and a liability, as staff learned to recognize the difference between a genuine dignitary and a diplomat with a briefcase full of static. In this world, the Waldorf-Astoria was more than a symbol of American glamour. It was a stage for soft power, where the clink of crystal and the hum of encrypted lines blended into the background noise of 20th century diplomacy. The irony was never lost on the staff. A hotel built on family rivalry now hosted a quieter, more dangerous contest, one where the stakes were measured not in social standing but in secrets and surveillance. In November 2014, the Waldorf-Astoria changed hands for $1.95 billion, a price tag that stunned even seasoned real estate watchers. The buyer, Anbang Insurance Group, was a little-known Chinese insurer with a sudden appetite for global landmarks. The sale agreement filed with the New York State Department of State guaranteed the Waldorf-Astoria would remain a luxury hotel under the Hilton brand. For a moment, the deal looked like another chapter in the city's long story of reinvention, a historic hotel reborn with international capital, its Art Deco bones polished for a new era. But behind the headlines, the transaction set off alarms in regulatory offices on both sides of the Pacific. Within 2 years, Anbang's chairman Wu Xiaohui faced a sweeping investigation by Chinese authorities. Prosecutors accused Wu of orchestrating a $10 billion fundraising scheme, using high-yield insurance products to finance an overseas buying spree that included the Waldorf-Astoria. In March 2018, the Shanghai Intermediate People's Court convicted Wu of fraud and embezzlement, sentencing him to 18 years in prison and ordering the seizure of his assets. The verdict cited the Waldorf-Astoria deal among the questionable investments that had drawn official scrutiny. The fallout was swift and dramatic. On February 22, 2018, China's insurance regulator announced it was taking control of Anbang for at least a year, citing the need to protect policyholders and stabilize the company's finances. A 31-member working group, including officials from the People's Bank of China and the State Administration of Foreign Exchange, assumed authority over Anbang's portfolio. Overnight, the Waldorf-Astoria, once a symbol of American excess and Gilded Age rivalry, became the property of the Chinese state. In New York, the Attorney General's office monitored the transfer, concerned about the movement of hundreds of millions in operating cash to offshore entities. Court filings and regulatory reports documented the complexity of the sale, the tangle of shell companies, and the shifting ownership structure. The Waldorf-Astoria's fate was no longer being decided in the boardrooms of Midtown or the salons of Fifth Avenue, but in the offices of government regulators, half a world away. The story of the Waldorf-Astoria's modern ownership is a cautionary tale. A hotel born from family spite and social posturing passed through the hands of global financiers, only to land in the custody of a foreign government after its new owner's spectacular legal collapse. What began as a monument to private rivalry now stands as a case study in the unpredictable afterlife of luxury real estate, where fortunes can be made, lost, and seized, sometimes in less time than it takes to renovate a lobby. On December 31, 2017, the Waldorf-Astoria closed its doors to guests, not for a holiday or a renovation in the usual sense, but for a transformation that would rewrite its purpose. The hotel that once played host to presidents, inventors, and the social architects of the Gilded Age was about to become a fortress for the ultra-wealthy. The plan, approved by the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission, called for the conversion of roughly 1,250 units into luxury condominiums. The prospectus filed with the state read less like an invitation to hospitality and more like an exclusive investment pitch. Entry-level apartments started at $1.7 million, about the price of a modest country estate, or, in New York terms, a very nice parking space. Developers promised a restoration that would honor the building's Art Deco bones, but the real story was in the floor plans. The grand public spaces, ballrooms, the Palm Court, Peacock Alley would remain, preserved as a kind of living museum for those who could afford the price of admission. The rest would be subdivided, privatized, and sold off in square-foot increments. Marketing materials boasted of private wine lockers, butler service, and a wellness center. as if the ghosts of Oscar Chirky and Mark Twain might reappear for a midnight snack or a quick session on the Pilates reformer. The shift from hotel to private residence was not just about new finishes or updated amenities. It was a profound change in who the Waldorf-Astoria was for. Where once the hotel had been a public stage for the ambitions of the powerful, it was now a sealed enclave, an asset class more than an address. The building's historic status required that certain features survive, but the spirit of the place had migrated from open hospitality to guarded exclusivity. The condo conversion filings stacked in the Landmarks Commission archives read like a coda to the old story. 1,250 new homes, each a monument to private wealth, priced to keep the riffraff and most of the city firmly outside. The transformation was complete. The Waldorf-Astoria, born from a family feud and built to dazzle the world, now belonged to those who could buy their way past the velvet rope. No invitation from Ms. Astor required. Somewhere in the legal and branding archives, the hyphen between Waldorf-Astoria sits like a punctuation mark with a grudge. It was never just a dash. It was a scar, a boundary, a silent referee in a family fight that outlived the original combatants by more than a century. The branding guides, revised and reissued through decades of corporate mergers, always insisted, keep the hyphen. No matter who owned the building, no matter how many times the marble was polished or the chandeliers replaced, the hyphen stayed put. An unbreakable truce frozen in print. The irony is hard to miss. The Astor name, once emblazoned on deeds, trust documents, and society invitations, has vanished from the property records. After the 2017 sale and the conversion filings, the Waldorf-Astoria's legal paperwork reads like a genealogy with the last names redacted. The hyphen, though, remains. It is there on the lobby directory, on the doorman's cap, on the embossed letterhead, outlasting every Astor signature, every family crest, every marble bust carted off during the latest renovation. Brand managers have tried to explain the hyphen's persistence. Some cite tradition, others claim it is just easier for international guests to recognize. But the real reason is less about clarity and more about residue. The hyphen is what is left when a feud burns itself out but refuses to be forgotten. It is the only character in the story that never picked a side, never changed hands, never demanded a trust fund or a corner suite. The original families are gone, their fortunes scattered, their rivalries dissolved into asset portfolios and condo bylaws. Yet the hyphen endures, a monument to the idea that in New York, even punctuation can have a legacy longer than the people who started the sentence. Today, the Waldorf-Astoria's gilded lobbies host guests who barely recall the Astor name. Billion-dollar deals and global politics now fill the halls once built for social snubs. The irony endures. A century's luxury, diplomacy, and innovation, all sparked by ego and spite. In a city always remaking itself, sometimes the pettiest motives leave the grandest marks. What will our own rivalries build next? Share your thoughts on legacy and irony below.